Good evening, everybody. I'm David Brashear. I'm the director of the Muscarelle Museum. Welcome to our event hall for a very special event tonight that we decided to do in collaboration with William & Mary Libraries and our great friends, my great friend, Carrie Cooper, the Dean of the Libraries. So before I give the microphone over to Carrie, I have to tell a short story about one of my first interactions with Mr. Hendrickson, with Paul. Professor Ed Peace, who's sitting in the back, and I twice taught a semester-long course. We co-taught a course here at William & Mary in 2018 and 2019 on Frank Lloyd Wright. And we converted those lectures into a sequence of lectures here at the museum before we closed for our renovation. I think it was a sequence of 4 lectures, and we ended with a book discussion. And the book discussion was on Mr. Hendrickson's Plagued by Fire book that he'll discuss tonight. And it was online. It was a virtual session. Of course, we were either in the middle of COVID or just emerging from COVID, and so no one was really gathering. And we hadn't even invited him to come and join us. We were just talking about it as 2 readers. And midway through our presentation, I get a note from my producer, one of my team members, and she said, Paul Hendrickson has just joined the Zoom. And so we quickly acknowledged him. We were thrilled that he had joined the Zoom, and we turned the mic over to him, and he was gracious enough to share some thoughts. But anyway, I'm going to leave the introductions to my good friend, Carrie Cooper, Dean of the Libraries. Carrie, please come up.
I love that story. So nice to be in the museum tonight. I want to first start out by thanking David and the Muscarelle team for allowing us to do a library event at the museum. Our spaces are not so large, and our parking is worse, if you can imagine, than the parking here. And so it really allows us to reach both lovers of the museum and of the libraries, and so we're just really thrilled to do this tonight. I also just wanted to say that you might have heard a lot of conversations and news about our status as a Research One highest research activity institution. And so this is a really big milestone for William & Mary. And one of the things about being a Research One university with highest research activity is you really need to distinguish yourself with distinctive collections. And that isn't just library collections and rare books, it's also museum collections, because that's what pulls people, scholars from around the world, to come to your university to do that research. And so we're really proud tonight to be celebrating the collection of Paul Hendrickson with this talk, to be in the museum with these wonderful collections that you have here. And finally, I wanted to thank Professor Caitlin McGill, who has been so gracious this week and has opened up her class to Paul so that he could teach with her, co-teach with her, collaborate with her and her students in her creative nonfiction class. So I wanted to thank her students, and I wanted to thank Caitlin, because what a joy to be able to have a collection and to have the person who built the collection here with the students so they could engage and be better for having that time with him. And then finally, I guess I lied, one more thank you. Henry Hart, for bringing this lovely man, Paul Hendrickson, to William & Mary. You are a connector, and on several occasions, you've expanded your professional network to include us at the library, and we have always been better for it. So I want to thank Henry. I think you're here somewhere, Professor Hart, so thank you. Thank you. Now for the formal introduction, and I'm going to read this part because I'll miss it, because he's a big deal and he's done a lot, so be patient. Paul Hendrickson is the author of 8 books, including the New York Times bestseller and National Book Critics Circle Award finalist, Hemingway's Boat, Everything He Loved in Life and Lost. In 2003, he won the National Book Critics Circle Award for Sons of Mississippi, A Story of Race and Its Legacy. His most recent book, Fighting the Night, was published in May 2024 and is an account of his father flying Black Widow night fighters in World War II. Today, Paul is going to discuss his 2019 book, Plagued by Fire, The Dreams and Furies of Frank Lloyd Wright. Paul has an extensive writing and teaching career. From 1998 to 2024, he was on the faculty of the Creative Writing program at the University of Pennsylvania. For 2 decades before that, he was a staff writer at the Washington Post. Paul is the father of 2 grown sons, both of whom work in media, and he lives with his wife Cecile, a retired nurse in Washington, D.C., and outside Philadelphia. We are especially proud that Paul has chosen to donate his professional papers and archive to William and Mary Libraries. This summer, 36 boxes arrived from Haverford, Pennsylvania to SWAM Library's Special Collections Research Center containing journals, files, interviews, and other materials from research Paul has conducted as a journalist and author. And I have to say, when we get these boxes, they're in varying degrees of organization. And this is not about you necessarily, because I'm sure you had it all in shape. But a lot of care is done by the staff and faculty at the library to get that in order so that scholars can easily identify what it is they want to research with, the materials they want to see. His work covers so many topics from Frank Lloyd Wright, Robert McNamara, and Ernest Hemingway to race relations, Vietnam, and the Catholic Seminary. It's a rich collection and will be incredibly useful to both researchers and students. Please give a warm welcome to Paul Hendrickson.
Hello, and thank you very much for coming tonight. I've had a little bit of a scratchy throat all week, so you'll forgive that. And I asked them to turn up the lights for my fading eyes. I'm going to, so you can't quite see these photographs as beautifully as you might if it were a little bit more of a darkened room, but we'll compromise so that I won't make too many mistakes from the text that I'm working from. I think I know right off the bat what to say about William and Mary, your priorities. The Tribe Women, they play tonight at 9, right? Whoa! Well, Carrie, you just introduced me. Go Tribe, did you see it? Yeah, I'm nothing. I need to get out of here. I need to get you folks out of here so you can get home to what's truly important. And also the weather. Thank you all for arranging such beautiful weather. I've been here all week. When we talked about doing this, and there was a lot of planning going on, we said toward the end of March, it'll probably be pretty nice. My goodness, the flowers, the magnolias, the cherry blossoms, the forsythia, the daffodils. Thank you all for being so thoughtful to a person who lives up in Pennsylvania mostly and in Washington, D.C. Will you indulge me for just a few minutes before I launch into this, just to say some thank yous? I feel it from my heart. David Brashear, who has just introduced me and told that wonderful story. I'm going to do a little addendum to that story myself. I remember it so well, but thank you, David. Thank you for this beautiful space. Yesterday, I'm staying right across the street in a bed and breakfast, and I stole into the museum yesterday for the first time and just luxuriated around. It is so bright and airy and spacey. I think Frank Lloyd Wright would approve. One of the things he often talked about was breaking the box, opening it up, opening up the room, opening up the space. And so as I walked around and went to all the galleries yesterday, not as much of the Michelangelo as I wanted, looking at some other of the rooms, I thought, this is such a beautifully designed place. It has to be one of the most prestigious university art museums in the country. So you all share in it, and congratulations to you all. Congratulations to you, David. Carrie Cooper, the Dean of the Libraries, of the University Libraries, who just introduced me, she has an amazing staff. The leader always sets the tone. And I won't name the 7 or 8 people I've been working with over the last few months and for the various events we arranged for this week, but they know who they are. Each of them so courteous, so gracious, so professional. My heart is to you, and you know who you are, and I thank you so much. But a special thank you to Jay Guidemore, who works with Carrie and on Carrie's staff. Jay is the director of special collections at Swim Libraries and at Swim Library, and he came to our home up in the suburbs of Pennsylvania probably now 3.5 to 4 years ago, and he spent a day and a half on the 3rd floor of our home where my writing loft is, and stowed away in a loft space where all these boxes, and other people from other universities came. But Jay and I hit it off. And isn't it always the people, the people, the people? He has heard me say that too many times publicly. I won't further embarrass him, but just thank you, Jay. You are a prime reason why I'm standing here tonight, and an even more prime reason why I'm standing here tonight would be Henry Hart, whom Carrie referenced a while ago. I can't go into the story. Henry was the person who introduced me to Jay, and the rest is our so-called small little history, and I'm standing here at this podium. Henry Hart is a professor of English and a poet and a world-class woodworker. To the last I can attain for that, because we have some beautiful pieces of workmanship in our own home. So what I find, actually, is that you ladies in the audience are much better at making friends than we men are making at our. And the older male gets, this is my feeling, my experience, the harder it is to make friends. And when you're someone my age and you've found a new friend and made a new friend, it's a special thing indeed. So Henry, if your ears and cheeks aren't burning right now, maybe they never will. But that's what I feel about you. And Carrie Cooper also referenced Professor Caitlin McGill. She's not here tonight. She wanted to be. She invited me into 2 of her nonfiction creative writing classes this week, and a couple of the students are here. And I'm very grateful to her. It's always a disruption of some kind, but she just invited me in, and we had some talks over the last couple of months. I'm moving through this list of people and things I want to say thank you to from my heart. Here is a beautiful little irony. I think in this audience tonight, we haven't yet been able to hug, is Catherine Lanouette, who is an assistant professor of education at William & Mary. I knew her when she was this long. I knew her the first week she came home from the hospital to 5th Street Southeast on Capitol Hill in Washington, D.C. We lived on 10th Street Southeast, Capitol Hill, Washington, D.C., and her father, Bill Lanouette, who's out in California now, I hope he might get to see a YouTube of this show. He and I were great old journalism comrades. This was even before the Washington Post. This was at a long now defunct newspaper called the National Observer. Some might remember it. It was owned by the Wall Street Journal company, Dow Jones. Bill and I were comrade in arms at that newspaper. This is way, way back in the early and mid-1970s. And Catherine Lanouette, the second daughter of that family, came into the world, and I saw her, my wife and I saw her that first night. And so it seems to me, slightly miraculous that I'm here at William & Mary, and Catherine is an assistant professor of education. It's just one more little evidence of how long and gratefully I've lived in this hard, old, and beautiful world. Thank you. I have a son who is 41, my older son, and he's not here tonight. He's up in Washington, D.C., where I'll be headed to see our grandchildren. He's heard his father do too many of these, and he always says, Dad, get through it quickly. Get to the real thing quickly, Dad. Move it along. So Matt, I'm moving it along right now. Thank you. I'm going to talk I took off my watch. I'm going to talk for 30 or 35 minutes. I have a kind of a stump speech. It's long, it's modified, it's short. This is the short to modified. This will go 30 minutes at the most. And then we'll pass around a microphone, because if past is any prologue, some of you will say some things that are richer, or ask a question that might be richer than what I try to say here with a little bit of truth. The book I worked on for something like 8 years, and that took me from Fifth Avenue and East 88th Street in Manhattan, where the Guggenheim Museum is, to Spring Green, Wisconsin, to Bear Run, Pennsylvania, where falling water thrusts itself right out from rock face. Maybe some of you have noticed the photograph. It took me to those places. It took me to Kansas and California and a whole lot of other places in between. Well, it was never meant to be a cradle-to-grave, conventional Frank Lloyd Wright biography. You could say, I don't know how to do those. And besides, there are already too many. Rather, what I was trying for from the start was something I have attempted before in books: find storytelling pockets in a life that might somehow stand for the oceanic whole of that life. There is a figure of speech I recall from my boyhood seminary days: synecdoche, part for the whole, the festering grain of truth hidden inside the half-buried oyster. The aim was to go roughly in a chronological direction, an arc from east to west. June 8th, 1867, when Frank Lloyd Wright was born in Richland Center, Wisconsin, to April 9th, 1959, when Frank Lloyd Wright died in his sleep after a hospitalization and risky stomach surgery in Phoenix, Arizona. Even though he was in his hospital bedclothes, I like to picture him there at the last, at 4:45 a.m. that Thursday at St. Joseph's Hospital, the great silver-haired dandy with the swept side bangs, so vain about his dress as he was about everything else in life, fitted out and all set to go in his rolled brim pork pie hat and Dracula cape and those goofy pants, almost pantaloons, pegged at the ankles. The legend is he just sighed and floated off on the coolish air of that fine desert spring morning. Frank Lloyd Wright, born 2 years after the end of the Civil War, dead not quite 2 years after the launch of Sputnik. 91 years and 10 months on the earth. Poof, perfect, gone. But possibly not before he had slipped into the left side pocket of his jacket one of his soft black drafting pencils, along with a pocket knife for sharpening it, so that he might polish off a drawing or two in heaven. Nothing so seductive in this life, he once said, than the prospect of sitting down to a blank piece of saffron-colored onion skin paper with a stubby, coal-black, newly sharpened, soft-leaded pencil. There's no being lonesome after that, he said. It's almost hard to imagine, but in the last decade of his life, he designed nearly a third of his total output. He just kept rising and going to his tilted board with his T-square, triangle, and scale, with his fading eyesight and periodic inner ear disorder that could make him so dizzy and nauseous he would sometimes have to crawl around on all fours like a blind man. Quote, "That is what it means to be an artist, to seize this essence brooding everywhere, in everything, just behind aspect," he once said, beautifully, mysteriously, Wrightianly. In 1991, the journal Architectural Record published a list of the 100 most important buildings of the 20th century. 12 of his were on it. Had he been alive, he would have demanded a recount. His roofs were legendary for leaking. Why wouldn't they have leaked? He was always pushing the limit of materials, always straining against the form. "I don't build a house without predicting the end of the present social order," he once said. He liked letting himself into his houses, as he thought of them, to begin rearranging the furniture while the current owners were out, putting their ghastly trinkets in bottom drawers. Like Thoreau, like Jesus, he thought that too many material possessions are an unhealthy thing. Possibly the only thing he had in common with Jesus. One of his lifelong dictums was that his buildings were like plants and trees growing upward, in effect, from the inside out, emerging spanking wet and blinking their eyes to the world. It was part of his gospel of organic architecture, even if his definitions of that concept were always shifting around like verbal tectonic plates and sometimes seemed to mystify even him. He just needed to conceive the thing, draw the thing, make the thing. The thing had simply shaken itself out of my sleeve, the old shaman liked to say. In a 72-year career, that's not a typo, in a 72-year career as an architect and an egotist, he shook more than 1,100 things from his sleeve. A nearly incredulous number by any artistic measurement. They were churches, schools, offices, banks, museums, hotels, medical clinics, an automobile showroom, a synagogue, a mile-high skyscraper, and one very strange-looking Phillips 66 gas station in Cloquet, Minnesota. Excuse me, I'll take a sip. I stepped on my own line. One very strange-looking Phillips 66 gas station in Cloquet, Minnesota. Overwhelmingly, though, they were houses, residences, shelters for mankind. And by this fact alone, I wonder if it isn't possible to start thinking of this supreme artist and insufferable man through a slightly different and softer lens. He wished to create dignified human spaces that would be around long after he was not. I have been in about 100 of those spaces, those dignified human residential spaces. And there are certain moments, if the light is falling right, when it will begin to seem as if Whitman is singing to Emerson and vice versa, channeled through an ego that could see both of theirs in the great stakes game of fame and self-love and raise you by half. But there are also moments when what comes, as others before me have said, is the wonder of a religious feeling. Taliesin at tiny Spring Green, Wisconsin, was Wright's own home and the place where he lived longer than anywhere else. In Welsh, it means shining brow, Taliesin. He built it into the not quite top of a green hill overlooking a looping bend in the Wisconsin River. Everywhere in the house there is wood, especially cypress, giving the interior, the more so in the lamplit evenings, a kind of pumpkin gleam. This hill and this valley were Wright's ancestral country on his maternal side, and he had known it and he had loved it since boyhood. Almost 7 decades from his death, Wright worshipers from around the globe come to this bluffed and still rural and sweetly rolling neck of southwestern Wisconsin to wonder at the thing he made, at the thing he rebuilt, and yet rebuilt again and rebuilt again. And I suppose with that sentence, I am already nodding toward a 4-letter word, the leitmotif of this story: fire. For a cluster of reasons, and not without recognition of the risks, I chose to start the story, or my Wright story, right there, or here, so to speak, at Taliesin in Spring Green, Wisconsin, with a deep look at the most savage and iconic moment in this incredibly myth-laden life. I suspect some of you know instantly to what I am referring. That inferno midday, August 15th, 1914, when the greatest architect this country has yet produced suffered a personal catastrophe that would have destroyed a man of lesser will and lesser ego, although maybe that's just saying the same thing twice. When a black employee in a white serving tunic, supposedly getting ready to ladle out the midday soup, went berserk with a shingling hatchet and ropes of gasoline splashed beneath the door jambs. In 12 or 14 minutes of blurring chaos, small and quiet-seeming Julian Carleton, about whom history is still confounded, managed to murder or fatally wound 7 people, one of whom, perhaps the first of whom, was the 45-year-old woman whom Wright deeply loved and had been living with indecently, I use that word in quotes, for the past several years, even as his own decent and denying wife, down in the sedate Chicago suburb of Oak Park, kept praying he would somehow come to his moral senses and return to his family. The attacker split her head nearly in 2 with one rounding swing. Her first name was Mema, Once she had been his client and near neighbor in Oak Park. 5 years before, the two lovers had abandoned their families to run away to Europe together, and ever since had been living in a kind of flouting sin, or that's the way the world had it, that's the way the pulpits had it. Wright wasn't there that noonday. He had left Chicago 4 days earlier, intending to be back on the weekend. If the slayer had had his way, there would have been no survivors, nothing to be back to. As much as this moment has been chronicled, pored over, dreamed into by what is now more than 3 generations of Wright biographers and historians, dreamed into by playwrights, by newspaper feature writers, by documentary filmmakers, by a handful of novelists, by conspiracy theorists, there is still so much about it that has to be imagined, conjured, which is to say, we know so much and simultaneously so little, which is, in a way, its own definition of Frank Lloyd Wright himself. Riddles wrapped up inside of riddles, triangles drawn inside of circles, drawn inside of squares. But wait a minute. Who was Julian Carlton? What I discovered in the 8 years of doing this book is that for a whole century and more, the figure at the center of the moment we're talking about, August 15th, 1914, this figure, this person, Julian Carlton, had remained a kind of cipher, almost a cartoon of madness. It's as if we always had the deed and none of the life. History has had a hard time just getting his name straight. You can look in some of the earlier Frank Lloyd Wright biographies and they can't even spell his name right. Here I have to bring up an old Washington Post newspaper legend. His name was Shirley Povich. He worked 75 years, that too is not a typo, at the Washington Post. You know what he used to tell his young scribes in the sports department? If you go, it'll happen. What amazing words. If you go, it'll happen. Perhaps without fully realizing, I was also being pushed forward with those words by something Wright himself once said, namely this: I believe that in the search for the answer lies the answer. So I went, so I searched, and yes, some of it happened. And here is but one thing I found and was gratefully happy to change the record on after a century. The slayer was never from Barbados or any other Caribbean place, as had been passed along in these libraries of uncounted books and newspaper feature stories. He was, in fact, from backwoods Alabama, one of at least 13 children with parents who may have been born into slavery. This is not an inconsequential fact. Okay, I suppose I'm now egging you, and not so slyly, to pick up the book and find out the rest of it. But I will say this much to you here. The mysteries of Julian Carlton, with their outward spreading concentric circles, refracted back powerfully on Frank Lloyd Wright himself, helped me understand his life a little better. A life inscribed, circumscribed by race, fire, murder, loss, regret, concealed haunt, and all of it somehow inseparable from his artistic genius. From the outset of my search, which I considered a journalistic search, essentially, because that's what I primarily am, an old, happily ink-stained wretch from the groves of newspaperdom. From the outset of the search, I was determined to try to knock back what I believe is a wrong-headed misperception, namely that the stainless steel armature of Frank Lloyd Wright's ego and arrogance allowed him to ride through the world for nearly a century without pain or remorse and with little compulsion to ever look back, unlike Lot's wife in the Bible. I simply don't believe this. He was always looking behind, however surreptitiously. There's too much evidence otherwise. It's there at the margins. It's ghosting at the edges. Sometimes it's not ghosting at all. It's in the narrows, hiding in the blue channels of the impossibly swirled life. It's there if you are just willing to look, if you are just willing to listen. Listening. Quote, "In my own life, there is much that is complex, at least. It is difficult for me to square my life with myself, and I cannot rest until it is done or I am dead," he wrote in a letter to a patron in 1908. 3 decades later, in a letter to that same patron's widow, he said, "I only wish I had been less taking and more giving where your husband was concerned, but character is fate, and mine got me into heavy going, and no safe harbor yet in sight." Listening. Ugly things happen. I've said that the best and the worst of everything came to me. He said this in a letter to another patron 8 years later, with whom he was having titanic fights about the building of the Guggenheim Museum. In the days after August 15th, 1914, when his back and neck were sprouting with hideous boils, when he couldn't sleep or eat, and he was rising in a little back room in the saved part of Taliesin, the small part that didn't burn, when he was rising in the middle of the night to take ice baths and to go out on the hills in the moonlight or gallop across the valleys on his horse in the daytime, this prideful man said quietly to his baby sister, "You know, sis, you told me once when I was reaching so high that someday I would pull something down that would destroy me." A quarter of a century later, in 1938, he said, "I have found that when a scheme develops beyond a normal pitch of excellence, the hand of fate wants to strike it down. The Japanese made a superstition of the circumstance. Purposely, they leave some perfection somewhere to appease the jealousy of the gods. I neglected the precaution." 10 years before that, on December 5th, 1928, from another letter, "I've met with terrible misfortunes and accidents. There is a good deal of sadness back of all the bravado, and though you may not know it, I too have fought a good fight." Well, you get the idea, and there's plenty of more. Remorse. Much less shame, much less secret haunting. Hey, these are not ideas that we associate with Frank Lloyd Wright. But what if our ideas are wrong, have long been wrong, or at least not wholly correct? I suppose I don't really have another name for the thing I'm trying to get at here tonight, except the word humanity. The problem is, when you are a writer, an old journalist, in search of that humanity, wish to make a case for it in a book, you have to be willing to kick away with your shoe so much of the refuse, dross, under which behind which the humanity and the vulnerability will lie every time. That's the book that I sought to write, however imperfectly. Oh yes, that four-letter word, fire, fire itself. If Frank Lloyd Wright has seemed to resist true explanation by his uncounted chroniclers, including the person standing in front of you who is just about to conclude and pass the microphone, if he has seemed to resist true explanation, and probably all for the better, this much can be said. He lived his preposterous life in a kind of beautiful rage, and flames ran through it. I have spoken here in really only the briefest way of August 15th, 1914, but fire of one degree or ravage or another came down on him like biblical rain, not just that time, but in 1925, 1927, 1929, 1932, 1937, 1952, 1954, that four-letter word. Even after he was dead, it was as if fire would not leave him alone. In the early 60s, there were 3 blazes at Taliesin West in Arizona in less than 3 years. All my life, I have been plagued by fire, he said in pure poetry a few years before he died. And I am grateful to him for giving me a title for a book. I was once having this conversation at Taliesin West with one of his apprentices, a man named Arnold Roy, who's deceased now, who had come as a 19-year-old from Boston and had gotten mesmerized, and who was now past 80 and suffering his various ills. He had kindly hobbled out of his room into the fire-like heat of an Arizona noonday to make time to meet me. He was seated at lunch with other old apprentices and current staff and architectural fellows. When the subject of fire came up, something flint-struck. It was as if 6 or 7 decades of a life had just been lopped off. Frank Lloyd Wright attracted fire, he said, leaning across the table, his eyes as big as marbles. Pause, beat, almost a fiery gleam. And then I suppose the next question is, why? But he just let it hang in the tinderbox, desert, May, midday air. And so will I. Thank you very much. I am right on the money. It's 5:45. While the microphone, Joanna, are you going to pass the microphone around if someone has some questions? Okay. While the first person is getting ready with the first microphone, I said I had a little tiny PS addendum to that story David Brashear told about they were having a live-streamed virtual Frank Lloyd Wright discussion. This was, I know when it was. I looked it up the other night, David. It was in June of 2021. We were in the pitch. We were in the pitch of the pandemic. Here's my part of the story. The reason I even knew about it was I got some kind of little Google alert that the Muscarelle Art Museum at William and Mary is holding a Frank Lloyd Wright symposium tonight. And I said, oh my goodness, they'll be bad-mouthing me terribly. And David Brashear and Professor Ed Pence were doing the opposite. So I signed on, so surreptitiously. I just signed on, and I let myself listen for 20 minutes and 30 minutes, and they were saying reasonable, beautiful, nice, way more than I deserved kind of things. And believe me, some reviewers out there had not said some kindly things. So I did. I went on the chat or whatever it is and said, I'm Paul Hendrickson, and I actually wrote the book and under discussion, and I just wanted to let you know I'm here. And I was so scared up in my little western suburb of Pennsylvania that my name was being taken horribly in vain. And if it was, I would have, happily turned it off in 2 minutes. But I just kept listening and listening and listening. That's how I knew about it. Who's got a question that somebody wants to ask here? Yes, sir. Can you get the microphone to that?
Thank you for the enlightening talk. And could you please tell me, what is the church that comes through the pictures and the house before the Guggenheim? Thank you.
I have some fading ears. I think what you said, can I speak of, did you say Unity Temple? Is that what you said? The church? And the house that was before that? Okay. Unity Temple. I said that I have stood before and been inside of 100 of the domestic residences. There are 400 extant Wright buildings in the United States. I've been in more than 200. Of all of them, Unity Temple is the place that moves me so deeply. How many people have ever been to Unity Temple in Oak Park? Look, a good sprinkling of hands. Just the way you have to enter. You can't enter directly. Of course, his ego and his arrogance were at work. He makes you come in this way. He makes you go downstairs into a cloister, and you have to climb some steps. And then you emerge into this, what seems like a weightless space floating in air. I said in the book, it's like emerging from the tunnels of an old ballpark, say Wrigley Field, built in 1912 or something, and coming out into incredible sunshine and seeing that sparkling green diamond, that baseball. That's what coming up into the space of Unity Temple is like. It's the most magical place in the world. I beg all of you to find a way to go see it. There are only 400 seats, and no seat is more than 40 paces from where the main person was talking. How is that possible? It's a kind of cubed cube. Vincent Scully, who was the great architectural professor and critic at Yale, he said beautifully, he said, it's not a very large space, but I think it's the biggest space in America. That's Unity Temple. I was working on a book before Plagued by Fire about Ernest Hemingway, another Oak Park, Illinois genius. Their lives were a generation apart. They would have, Hemingway was a 5-year-old in short pants playing over at the neighborhood school while Wright was at his drafting table. But how did that happen? That Wright wasn't from Oak Park, but he lived in Oak Park for many, many, many years and did his greatest architectural work there. And the whole Prairie House developed in Oak Park. Every time I go to Oak Park, I'm just so moved, and I would invite you all. It looks like a Mayan concrete bunker from the outside, a fortress, and then you go inside, and you have this incredible feeling. When I was working on Hemingway, and every day filled with anxiety and trying to take Valium at night to sleep, and the same thing with the Wright book years later, I would go into Unity Temple. This was way before I started working on Wright. I'm working on Hemingway. I would go into Unity Temple and try to get my calm back. You asked about the other house before. That is also a kind of, if it's the one, there's Julian Carlton, there he is. That's the only known photograph. The only known photograph. Because I don't have the sequence of the loop slides memorized, the one you might be talking about, is it the yellowish one that with the portico, and in fact where I am standing, do you see the doorway that I'm standing in? That's a separate picture. That's the Winslow House in River Forest, Illinois, which is one town away from Oak Park and is also a precursor, a forerunner of the Great Prairie period that ran from about 1900 to 1909. I want to hear some other questions. I'm hoping someone might ask, how'd you even get on Frank Lloyd Wright? But we'll let's see if that happens. Mr. Brashear has a question. Don't we have to curry favor with the director of this incredible building?
All right, I have a great question for you. We know you love Unity Temple, but we also know that most of his production were residences.
Yeah.
So aside from Falling Water, in the places you've been, which have you been most moved by?
Oh, David, you just led into the question I wanted to answer. It's the B. Harley Bradley House in Kankakee, Illinois, built in 1900. It is my boyhood Frank Lloyd Wright house. It's not, some other critics would not by any means call it the greatest Frank Lloyd Wright Prairie House. For me, it is the St. John the Baptist. It's the precursor. He was trying to get the prairies right, and he built this one in 1900. It's in a little downstate Illinois town called Kankakee. I grew up there. It's 50 miles below Chicago. I lived on the same street as the B. Harley Bradley House. We lived 5 blocks north, up where the middle-class people lived. When I was 9 years old, 1953, so you can do the math and figure my age, under the Christmas tree, Santa left a J.C. Higgins maroon 3-speed bicycle. Suddenly, I had my freedom. And that spring, when I was making my way toward Riverview Park down at the river where the rich people lived, I saw the B. Harley Bradley. I'm not going to stand here and say I saw it for the first time. I would have been vaguely aware, but I had freedom in a new way on my own J.C. Higgins 3-speed bicycle. And I mean, I'm exaggerating. I'm a writer now. I skidded on the brakes, and I'm leaning on the handlebars, and I'm having my epiphany. This otherworldly thing, it's here. There it is. There it is. There it is. God had this happen, this slide loop. And there's Unity Temple. Okay, all right. The B. Harley Bradley is my boyhood Frank Lloyd Wright house. I saw, it was as if it had come down from the moon. It was so otherworldly. It looked like nothing else in that Midwestern industrial town. Frank Lloyd Wright built it for a rich patron in 1900. How do I say this without sounding wifty and mysterious and arty-farty? I believe that we don't choose our books, they choose us. And I think the Frank Lloyd Wright book chose me that moment when I'm in the spring, maybe when the winter snows of Kankakee had thawed, and I'm leaning on my handlebars, having an otherworldly experience with this thing that beckoned me, scared me, attracted me, repelled me in a way, mystified me. But because I'm a very slow learner, it only took 6 decades for it to loop around and find me as a book project. David, that's the answer. Yes, sir, young man. Are you a student at William & Mary? I love it. Are you a budding architect, sir?
You know, Maybe. But
You know what? That's a beautiful answer. What undergraduate should be compelled by some old coot like me to say, "What are you going to be?" You know,
Exactly.
You're going to be. You're going to be what you're going to be eventually, and Frank Lloyd Wright would say you're going to be what you're going to be organically. Let it emerge organically. So, excuse me for asking, but what is your beautiful question already?
well, thank you, first of all. And thank you for coming to talk. I was wondering if you have any insight or any understanding of the Illinois Tower in Chicago, the tower that was not built that
Yeah.
you referred to earlier.
The ego, the arrogance of this man. He wanted to build a mile-high building. How many, we need the mathematician in the group, how many factors of 10, 20, 100 taller than the Empire State Building would that be? And he wanted to burrow it underground a mile deep and have it go a mile high. He presented it seriously to a group of Chicago journalists, the Illinois Tower. He was totally serious. And he said he could change the world order. It never got built. That was, the great architectural critic of the New Yorker said that was a circus show, and he refused to come out from New York for that press conference in Chicago. I think Wright was totally serious, and those plans still exist. But he could never get funding, and it was just too impractical. But that was who he was. How about somebody else? And I'm watching the time. It's 6 o'clock. Are we okay for a little while? Tammy, you can signal me. Does somebody else have a question? There's a question over here. Can we get the microphone to this person? It's coming. It's coming to. Is that Catherine? No, you're not Catherine Lanouette. Oh, there you are in the back. So there's Catherine Lanouette, whom I knew when she was this big. Assistant professor of education at William and Mary. So, ma'am, if you'll just hold for a second. So Joanne and Bill bring Catherine home. She's that big, and we go over and see her. She has an older sister, Nicole, who's about 4 years older. Am I right? Do you know this? When Nicole was born, your older sister, your daddy, my comrade in arms and journalism, came into the National Observer with bumper stickers that we all had to put on our cars, and the bumper stickers said, "Nicole Lanouette for president." She's now a psychiatrist in California with a big distinguished career. The parents are in California. Catherine is here. I don't quite remember what bumper sticker or what he would have come in with when you were born, but it was some kind of immense prideful thing, justifiably prideful. Ma'am, we're being so interruptive here. I'm sorry. Please, your question.
No. Thank you for coming first. And I'm just curious.
Can you speak a little?
Can you hear me?
Yes, ma'am, I can hear you now. And if I don't get it all, you'll all help me. Yes.
I'm just curious what led you to the writer's path. I mean, you're excellent. A++.
Thank you for asking that. In my wayward youth, I was a student for the Catholic priesthood. 7 years. That became the subject of my first book, published 43 years ago, called Seminary, A Search. In a sense, every book I've ever written could have a colon behind it, a search. Ma'am, even when I was studying for the priesthood in those junior seminaries that don't exist anymore, it was an experience that couldn't survive the 1960s. I went into a religious life in the late 50s and came out in the middle of the torn 60s. I had inside me a secret little gleam that if I did actually go all the way to ordination and become a priest, I was going to become the writer-priest. I come from no tradition of writing. My father was a son of a Kentucky sharecropper and grew up to be an airline captain after flying in World War II on Iwo Jima. He was a white-collar worker, but he worked his whole life with his hands, so to speak. My mother was a very creative person, but not in a way of writing anything down. I don't know. It was just inside me. I can remember standing up in front of my mom when I was 5 or 6 years old, reciting these goofy poems that I had just made up. When I was in the seminary, a very influential priest, English teacher, who was conducting the composition classes, the writing classes, he said, "Hendrickson, you are the master of cliches." But he said, "Let me tell you something." He said, "The fact that you even know the cliches when these other dolts don't, that puts you ahead of them. You know the cliches, and you're going to cleanse yourself of the cliches eventually." I don't think I've ever done that entirely. I can't answer it except to say that it was just in me, and in some ways, I would like to let the mystery be, which is a beautiful country song by Iris DeMen. Does anybody know it? Let the mystery be. How about another question or two or three? Yes, ma'am. We'll get a microphone to you. It's coming. It's.
Could you identify the other photos that we've been looking at?
Okay, there's the B. Harley Bradley. So what he's trying to do with the prairie houses, it's the big democratic east to west, manifest destiny. He wants to break open the box like we've done in we're experiencing in this building. He wants to open up these rooms and the word, what are the prairies thought of by coastal elites? As the flyovers. Wright grew up on the prairie. He saw the beauty of the prairie. He didn't see the prairie as anything to be despised. No, he said, "I will make my houses come up out of the ground like plants, and I will replicate." What is the central thing about the prairie? It's flat as a pancake. So that house in the photograph, the B. Harley Bradley, he doesn't quite have the whole prairie concept together, because in the middle of that house, there's a gable that kind of interrupts the east to west prairie effect. But if you went to Kankakee, Illinois, and stood at the bottom of South Harrison Street, we lived 5 blocks north, as I said, at 230 South Harrison. All you have to do is, you don't have to sail on your J.C. Higgins 3-speed down to see it. But if you do and stand in front of it, you will be aghast at how linear it is. But you asked to, so here he is, let's just go through a few of these. Here he is as a young man. There's Mama. There's Mama, who had her head split open, and possibly the first of the 7. There are the burning ashes of Taliesin. There were a few little tiny spaces that were left that didn't get burned. We don't have to go through them all, but just while we're going through some, and I haven't even looked at this slideshow in a while. This is the Winslow House, and you can see the linear quality of it. It's in River Forest, Illinois. It's not quite a prairie, but it's on the way to being a prairie. There is his father. If I spent a lot of time writing about Julian Carleton, I spent more time writing about this individual, William Carey Wright, who was a failed man, so to speak, but so much of, there he is at the piano, there's William Carey Wright. So much of Wright's genius descends from the father. And there he is, there's Frank Lloyd Wright at Taliesin West in Arizona, outside Phoenix, 1 month before he dies. Can't you see that 91 years and 9 months, he died at 91 and 10 months? Can't you see the weariness of life sagging him down? Let's see, this is in the doorway of the Winslow, and this photograph was taken by a great friend of mine, a retired cultural historian of the city of Chicago. His name is Tim Samuelson. I love the grandiloquence, the east to west, the prairie quality of that signature. And there he is with his tendinitis and nausea and everything else, going to the boards, And there he is. That's Jesus with the 12 apostles around him. There's Falling Water. How many have been to Falling Water? Oh, look. David, look again. Put those hands up. How many have been to Falling Water? Can I tell you a story about Falling Water? There's the B. Harley Bradley. And you can see how he doesn't quite have it all together because that gable there, but he's getting there. Can I tell you a Falling Water story? Oh, this is in Grand Rapids, Michigan. He wanted the dining space with those. He wanted to be the cave of the family. Never mind that he was a man for always wrecking the family. There's unity. I've got to tell you a Falling Water story, and we better stop. The first time I went to Falling Water, one of the National Tour Park guides, I told him what I was doing. Oh, that's Usonia 1 in Madison, Wisconsin. That's the Jacobs House. That's the Mouse House. The Mouse House, I call it. It's that big. What an amazing piece of architecture. Falling Water. Falling Water. This national park tour guide told me a story that made my knees start to quiver. He said, you know, the Japanese understand Wright better than any people on earth. They get Wright. They get him all the way. And he said, I have watched Japanese tourists coming off the big tour buses with their very sophisticated Nikon cameras. And eventually they make their way down the trail. That very picture we're looking at is taken from the spot. I bet some of you have walked down the trail 100 yards and you look back at Falling Water, and you can blink and you can almost lose sight of it. It becomes part of the natural landscape. That's what's so strange. It's erupting from the rock. So the tour guide said to me, he said, I have personally experienced Japanese getting off the tour buses and experiencing Falling Water for the first time, making their way down the trail, and it's brushed, and you turn around, and then you see, and he said, they turn around, and what do you think they do? And I said, I don't know. He said, they burst into tears. I think I should stop.